So then when we moved back to the States the second time in 2007, I designed a tool that I had been using myself for doing my tail ends of my bindings. I called it Brilliant Bindings. It, to this day, is still on the market, and it is the first trapezoid-shaped tool for bindings that came out in 2007. Checker actually took it that very first year, and I started putting my name out there to teach at some of the big shows. So there's the long story of what I did before quilting, and then jumping into quilting and then making quilting my business.
Welcome to Quilting on the Side, the podcast where we uncover the secrets to turning your passion for quilting into a profitable side hustle.
I'm Tori from the Quilt Patch by Tori.
And I'm Andi from True Blue Quilts. And together we're your co-hosts on this exciting journey of creativity, entrepreneurship, and all things quilting.
We're here to help you navigate the world of quilt pattern design, course creation, digital marketing, and running an online quilt business. We've been through the ups and downs ourselves, so we know what it takes to make money from your favorite hobby.
Yeah. Okay, well, we would like to welcome Debbie from Wendt Quilting to our podcast, and it's so nice to have you, Debbie. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And we always just let you start off with an introduction, how you got started quilting, and what that looks like right now.
Okay, long story or short story?
As much time as you want to take. It sounds like you've had an interesting journey.
Well, it's kind of all over the place. So let's see. How I got started in quilting back in 1985. I was teaching home ec, and there was a continuing education class at a local high school on quilting. So I talked to my aunt, and she and I took the class, and I thought, I could teach this because I was a home ec teacher and teaching kids and how to sew. And so I fell in love with it immediately. I knew I would because I had already played around a little bit with quilting. It was a point where fitting the body was difficult, as we all go through those phases. And a straight little 1/4 inch seam was right up my alley and what I knew I wanted to do. So that 1985 was my step into quilting. And then in 1992, there he was across a crowded room, was Bob Wendt, all the way in Cairo, Egypt. So I quit teaching. I packed up my house. I just purchased a house, and I moved to Cairo, Egypt. So we started a quilt group there. The gal that was most into quilting, there were two of them. Leslie was from California, and Chris was actually from Rhode Island. I am in Massachusetts now, and we started a quilt group and made things for local charities. So we had a big bazaar every Christmas, and we had a cross-stitch group, a quilting group, back in the days of plastic canvas. There was, I believe there was a sewing group. They did bratwurst. We did all kinds of things, but all of the monies that we got for that supported 65 local Egyptian charities. So that was the first time I started teaching quilting. And there was a group, how do I say it? Community Services Association, CSA, and they taught classes there, mostly for learning Arabic, things about Mahdi, local things. But I did teach quilting classes there. So that was my very first. So then when we moved back back to the States the second time in 2007. I designed a tool that I had been using myself for doing my tail ends of my bindings. I called it Brilliant Bindings. It, to this day, is still on the market, and it is the first trapezoid-shaped tool for bindings that came out in 2007. Checker actually took it that very first year, and I started putting my name out there to teach at some of the big shows. So there's the long story of what I did before quilting, and then jumping into quilting and then making quilting my business. First time to actually teach quilting. I had been teaching sewing all along.
And it sounds like you're traveling to teach.
I am.
And continue pattern design, etc.
Yes. So the tool came out, and then I wanted to support the tool with patterns. So I have 13 patterns that use the tool as a cutting template. Those of you that will see this on video, my Twirl Tool pattern is behind me, and it's the trapezoid shape of Brilliant Bindings. I'll just hold that up here in the camera real quick. So if you are seeing this on video, if not, you can look at my website. So I teach, I vend. My favorite is teaching. I would rather not vend, but it does help to support the trip. And yeah, local guilds. I do lectures at local guilds. I teach for local guilds. And that's what I'm doing now. So yeah, all of the above, kind of, sorta.
Yeah, that's seems very common in the quilting industry. You put your toe in the water with one aspect of it, whether it's a pattern or a tool, and start teaching, and just pretty soon it's your full-time job. That's awesome.
I always love hearing your story. You could tell it anytime. I think it's so fun to listen to. You're welcome. I actually had a lot of questions about your in-person stuff and shows and vending and stuff like that, if you don't mind me asking some.
Not at all.
All right. So how do you choose which shows that you go to?
You always get me with those questions, Tori. So when I first started, it was local. So Machine Quilters Expo, they were up in Manchester, New Hampshire. So that was an easy couple-hour drive up there, and I taught long arm and how to bind on the long arm. I taught long arm classes. And then I got a request for Tacoma, Washington. So that was back in the day of, I'm going to get the name wrong, Innovations. And so I flew to that show basically to teach, but then I had a little booth. I haven't shown that picture in a while. I'll have to put it up, but my mom was my cohort, and I had like 2 patterns, a couple of tools, and that's all I had in my booth. So it started very small, but now I'll go mostly wherever. I haven't been international to teach. I have been to international shows as an attendee. I have not vended. That's a lot of product to take a long way. When I do go by airplane, sometimes I'll ship things ahead if I know somebody in the area. Like my first show down in Daytona Beach, Florida, my husband's sister was down there in Orlando, so I could ship her product, and then we just flew in with my quilts and makeshift grid walls and all those kinds of things. And I did it in suitcases. I've done that several times. It's not fun. It's a lot of weight to carry around. So now I try to go in my big Suburban, and I just fill up the back end of the Suburban, and I drive to Houston. So there's a 4-day drive.
I was going to ask, how far have you traveled to go to a show? But would Houston be the furthest you've probably traveled?
By car, yes.
By car.
Yeah, by plane all the way from Massachusetts to Washington State. Yeah.
All right. So how did you start actually getting in the door to teach at larger shows?
I applied.
Okay.
So MQX I had been to the show before I taught. I knew who the owners were. I knew some of the teachers. And so I put it out there, hey, I'd like to teach. And here's what I teach. I taught beginners. I taught the bindings, how to build and bind a quilt on the long arm frame, something that beginning classes, a lot of people teach, but something a little different than what had been put out there before. That helps if you have something that's very unique to you. And as Andi said earlier, designing patterns, that was my way to teach my things. Instead of when I first started at a quilt shop, I was teaching other people's patterns and out of other people's books. But it kind of changes when your name's on it, and it's your design that you put out there and can have your stamp on it. So, but the other part of that question was you have to apply for most shows. Most shows will have a dot that says want to teach or teacher or teach. And then there's a whole process of submitting your classes, your titles, your fees. Sometimes some shows you get paid X number per student, and supply lists and photos. And so there's a lot to have prepared in order to take that step.
Do you have a workshop that's pretty popular with in-person shows?
The one that sells out every single show is, believe it or not, bindings. I call it Become a Brilliant Binder because we use my Brilliant Bindings tool, but it's all the steps of a binding. So whether it's straight of grain, bias, curved edge, straight edge, your mitered corner, and then finishing those tails. That's the most popular, and I'm pretty sure I would have to check my records, but it has sold out every single time it has been given, which is awesome. And you look at bindings and people are like, oh, it's just the binding, I don't have to worry about it, but it does make or break a quilt, especially if you're going to enter in a show.
Mm-hmm. Great topic, because every quilt, I hesitate whenever I use those absolutes, but every quilt needs a binding, and there are, lots of techniques with the popularity of the flange bindings now, and I'm seeing a lot of big stitch bindings, so people are using a little bit more decorative stitching on their bindings as well, but it's such a key skill. So I can see how that would be in demand.
Yeah, actually, I created bindings all on domestic machine. So talking about the flange, that goes in as part of the binding as opposed to adding a separate piece in there. I just did a big stitch on my challenge for my guild that was just last week. So yeah, there's art quilts. When you said not every quilt has a binding, almost all of them do. You don't always see it because it might be that knife edge binding where it's turned around to the back. So that art quilt is just the edge of whatever happened on their front piece.
Is that how they do that? I was fascinated. I went to, Modern Quilt was QuiltCon 2 years ago, and so many of them were like that. And I wanted to touch them so bad so I could see how they did the binding, but you're not allowed to touch them. But that's how they do it?
Yeah, most of them, yeah. It's back in the day, in the sewing days, we're talking sewing clothing for years and years. It's like doing a collar, where you turn that under So you just see the edge. You don't see that piece on the, the outside edge of your collar or cuff or whatever it is. Yeah, it's turned to the back.
Yep. Follow-up question. Since you have had such a wonderfully long career in quilting in so many different areas, can you comment on the changes and the challenges that you've seen over the last, 5 to 10 years? We just, got through that major upheaval of the pandemic, but it sounds like you've been quilting and teaching even before the internet was such a big deal. So you've seen a lot of changes in your journey.
Yeah, I have. I didn't vend until later. So my very first show, well, I did MQX in 2007, and I went to market in 2009. So yeah, but yeah, when I started, it's everything. There wasn't hardly internet, we didn't have that access. So changes, I wish I could predict. I have a dear friend that she can walk a show and go, oh, the new color will be, and sometimes you can see them. A couple of years ago, it was all about hexies. It was all about the teals and the oranges. As a matter of fact, I'm doing hexies now. So, but that was more of a personal thing as opposed to trying to keep up. It's trying to keep ahead or guess what's coming. And it's a tough one. It's kind of a roll of the dice a lot of times. What's next? What I have seen changes. I have seen vendors come and go, especially since COVID, since the pandemic, when things were closed. A lot of my dear vendor friends said, I can do this at home. Mm-hmm. I don't have to be on the road. I don't have to travel all those miles. So Batik is a good example. Bruce and Diane are doing it from their home now, and I miss them dearly at shows. They're still in business. You can still get that amazing fabric, but that's what's happened is we're losing some of that generation of vendors, and I don't see a lot of new ones coming in. So it's a real question mark in my mind with what's going to happen with some of the shows.
Yeah, was it Vermont Quilt Show that just recently folded? So yeah, besides seeing the individual vendors leaving the space, it's sad to see some of these long-standing shows that have had to shut down as well.
Yeah, I was supposed to teach.
Yeah,
so every day, and it was tough to lose that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One thing we're hoping with our show is to invite a new generation to come into the quilting industry. It's one thing we're hoping for here.
It's good. And I mean, I know Tori's the younger of the three of us. And I'm just guessing because I've seen
I'm in the middle, I think.
A little bit longer. But yeah, but do they want to? I hope they do. When I taught home ec, getting those kids and the boys interested in sewing, it was a power tool. Woo! I've got this machine in front of me. And I think the masks helped people to buy a machine. And now we need to grab those people and say, come on, you can come quilt. You can make this, you can do it too.
Let's have some more fun with fabric.
Exactly.
So I have a few more questions, if you don't mind. I wanted to ask you, what sells best at a show when you're vending, in your experience?
Mm-hmm. I demo when I vend. So unless I'm teaching and I'm not in the booth, a lot of times my husband is helping me. He doesn't like to demo. He's my proofer, so he knows the words, but he doesn't put them into play. Usually whatever I am demoing, it will catch their eye. So my Brilliant Bindings has been the top for a long time. I did a house quilt with houses and trees. It's a little bitty, I don't know if you want to talk prices or not. It's a little bitty $5 price point. And it's a smaller, I say it's packed with instructions, so it's a smaller size, just a little guy, with very detailed but easy instructions. There's not, a ton of paper.
So she's holding up a little pamphlet. It's a pattern. It looks like a little pamphlet. It's kind of in miniature. Yes. That's really neat.
Yeah, so it folds down to like half of a regular pattern size. It's like 3x4, I think. So yeah, it's smaller in size, but yet it still has your instructions. And that quilt, I think, gets the most sales of anything. Brilliant Bindings is number one for time and time and time again. But if I would pick one pattern that I've done over the years, it would be my Won't You Be pattern. My neighbor. You
That's
can
awesome.
tell the era that we grew up in.
Do you ever add fabric kits with your patterns when you're going to shows, or do you stick to strictly the tools and the patterns and let people find the fabric other places?
That's a great question, and that's exactly what I tell them. I sell the patterns and the tools. You go to the people that have the fabric to buy your fabric. I have done kits. I would love to be able to, but my house cannot accommodate that. Even though it's my husband and I, that's a lot of fabric. It's a lot of cutting. And those people that do kits, hats off to them, because it's a lot of work. I carried around a fabric for one of my patterns for 3 years. It was a raspberry in black and white. Didn't sell. One show, boom, sold out of all 3 of them, and then everybody wanted more.
And you're like, I'm not going down that road again. It's been
I carried them enough. So that's, my take is I like pretty fabric too, and I can't just pick one. So, and our tastes are all different. Mm-hmm. So I let the fabric people sell the fabric, and I'll be their support. I'll be their cheerleader and send my customers to them, especially when I know there's a good fit with a certain brand or what genre of fabric.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good collaboration opportunity.
Yeah, it is. And I've had quilt shops that have stopped by and said, oh, that's the pattern everyone's carrying around. And, it would be a good one for quilt shops to kit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. So you did talk a little bit of price point. Would you mind if I ask you a little bit more?
I'm open.
All right, great. I'd like to get more into money and more of our interviews. I think it'll be great for our audience. So I was just wondering, how much do you typically make at a show? I know it kind of varies, but do you have like a price point you typically make, or is it like more of a goal? You're smiling.
I have gone to shows where I have not covered my booth. So that's how bad it has been. Sometimes, as I would love to cover my expenses. I don't talk a lot of what do I make, because I don't really. Everything I make goes back into the business. I don't even pay myself. I know that's something that I should do. So for right now, I'm making money to support going to the next show. Mm-hmm. And some vendors are only show to show. They have to do this show and do well in order to have the funds to go to the next show. Mm-hmm. So if I can cover my costs, if I can cover my booth, you got to pay for electricity. You've got to pay for getting there, your gas, your food, your hotels. If I pull my trailer, that's more gas money. You're talking, I'm just going to pull a number, $2,000 for a booth, couple thousand for your expenses. So, if I can pull in, but then I've got all the price of the product that I have with me. Mm-hmm. So, there's a lot of thousands that's happening.
Yeah.
It seems to be a fairly good payoff for you in experience. Is that fair to say? Like, do you enjoy going to the show so much that you don't always mind breaking even? I mean, I would be disappointed to lose money for sure, but
you want to talk to my husband? I never want to not break even.
Yes, definitely, at the very least, break even.
Yeah, exactly. When I went to shows, I spent money. I was one of those that I would walk the floor and I would buy as much as I could. But we're seeing a lot more customers walk the show and not spend any money. I understand it completely. The flip side of that, I don't want to offend anybody, but the flip side is if you don't spend your money, we can't go. Mm-hmm. If we don't make money, there's some shows that I probably will not go back to. And even teaching, that helps me to support that. But then I'm out of the booth and I'm not demoing. Yeah. So I lose income there, even though I'm getting income by teaching. It's a tricky.
Yeah, it sounds like you're walking a tightrope there.
Exactly. That's the word I was thinking about. Yes.
Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate your honesty on all of that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Tori and I know a little bit about the various booth fees and you think it's going to be just the flat rate, and then you've got all the extras that are you going to spend that extra couple $100 to get the lights and multiple outlets and all internet fees now so that you can run your Square transactions. And
that's something that I learned the hard way. I had to upgrade my phone so I could get my mobile hotspot. Mm-hmm. And I run my Square off of my mobile hotspot. So at least I know, it's secure. And some of those fees for internet can run in the 500s plus.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I think that's what we did for QuiltCon was the hotspot. I think that was the best option we found.
Yeah.
If you can. And, I do use Square since we talked about that. I don't know how many of your peeps that are listening or watching. There's all kinds of different options out there. When I started, that was the best one for me. And
last question I've got for you here is, do you have a system for setting up? I've seen pictures of your booth and it's usually a double booth from what I see. Like, do you have a system to set that all up in such a short time frame?
I used to change every single time. I would set it up differently. And a lot of times I only had a single booth or a single on the corner. But now with expanding to I now have 5 tools. I have quilts for every tool. I have 13 different patterns for brilliant bindings. I have a new book. For my hexie tools, I have 12 plus on my little ones that I was talking about earlier. If I want to show all of those, and people go, oh, I don't like that one, but I do like this one. It's a lot of quilts to hang. It's a lot to carry.
Yeah.
So I try, and if somebody sees me at a show, it's like, oh, same layout. But I had to do something otherwise it would take me days to set up. A lot of shows are only 2 days, sometimes 1.5. Some shows are only 1 day to set up. So, and if you have rain and you have a line of marshaling to get in, that just cuts that time down. So that was something I tried to do within the last couple of years, is that one's going here in the middle, this one's going over here in this corner, or at least have it kind of set in my head ahead of time, because I'm the one that hangs all my quilts. So yeah, climb the ladder.
Now, one question I see come up a lot in the quilting groups for people who are going to go vend are just questions about setup. Like, how do you set things up? How do you get your quilts to hang in a booth?
So what worked for me, I don't have any of that with me, but I'll explain it. There are curtain rings, and you can buy them at a lot of the box stores, that have little clips with little hooks on them. I took off the ring part and I used those little clips on the top along my binding. And then the show hooks that you see with all the signs and all of that, they get left after a show. So if you walk around, you'll start your collection, of your hooks. You can purchase them also. I have purchased some in the past. The pants hangers are another way. Personally, I didn't like it. It was more bulk. It was more weight to carry. So these little bitty hooks that are like the size of my fingernail worked really well for me. And then they just go up over. I know some people, a friend of mine uses straight pins, but you're not supposed to pin to the drapes, the show drapes. So you have to have something that goes up over those poles, and can come up and down pretty quickly. While I'm on that, some people bunch them, in a little fan bunch, and they spread out. Donna Robertson does that. Her 3-yard patterns, her 3-yard quilt patterns. She does a lot of the bunching. Mm-hmm. And then that's just one hook that you can put up over. You don't see all the quilt, but you can get a whole lot more up there across your pole instead of having things out. I overlap because I have so many now that I can't show the entire quilt. So I overlap them. And one other thing I wanted to point out on that is grid walls. So my patterns, my tools, a lot of that will go onto a grid wall that just packs up flat right down the side of my Suburban, in the back. And that's a good way to hang product. And you can also hang quilts on them.
Sure. Yeah. Those are such great insider tips. And so I'm hearing you purchased your own grid wall, because a lot of times, obviously the show, I can't remember what they're called, the setup people, the staff, they have options that you can rent all that stuff, but then
the decorator,
again, it's more
the decorator. Yeah.
Right. That's added expense. So anything you can do for yourself, obviously, is going to help.
And some of the big shows, you even have to rent the poles. So I now have my own set of poles and bases. And those are the kinds of things, depending on what show you're doing. And even if I'm doing a little guild show, I'm able to set that up instead of just having a gymnasium background. I can actually create myself into a booth, and I have drapes, and it starts adding up. But like you said, Andi, if you buy it, then you don't have to rent it every time.
I was curious, over the span of the pandemic, when all the shows were closed down, did you find any success online? Did you pivot at all, or did you wait?
I did the Global Quilt Connection, which I know a lot of us that were out there teaching.
So let's, 1 second, let's explain what that is. So the Global Quilt Connection was a group of quilters got together and basically put all the teachers in one spot for guilds, so that we could host programs and workshops virtually. So it was a one-stop shop for you to find a teacher for your guild, so that we could keep things going online. And it also, it was by Lyric Montgomery and
Sue Blywise. Yeah, but Sue's not with her. There's somebody else that's helping
They've
Lyric
since
now.
parted
Yeah.
ways, yeah. But it became so much bigger than they anticipated. But yeah, Global Quilt Connection was a place where quilt guilds could go to find teachers during the pandemic.
Yeah. And I did some Zoom during that time. I think that was part of where we were going. But I'm not sure. You may have to think about your question again, Tori.
Yeah, just curious how you pivoted from in-person to online during the pandemic.
Yeah, so I did do that. That helped because I immediately got some contacts. And it's interesting that I've actually had more now that I'm back in person. Some people are still doing Zoom. I've got New Mexico. I'm going to be Zooming with their guild. I'm trying to remember when it is. It's coming up. I think it's in September. But it's like they can bring me to New Mexico without having to fly me out there. So I think it's a great option. And even those of us that are in really cold climates that get a ton of snow,
Yes.
it's a way to continue the programs during those winter months.
So have you developed slideshow presentations for those Zoom aspects, or are you able to like actually hold up the quilt and let people see up close? Because I know that is the drawback. Everybody wants to touch the quilt and you can't do that on a video.
So when I first started doing Zoom, I held them up. I actually set up my grid walls. I set them behind me. My entire room would have been covered in quilts, and I walked around and showed them. I did find that was a bit clunky. So I did take photos of a lot of things, and I created PowerPoints. Mm-hmm. And how I've used that now, transitioning back to in person, is I'm still using those PowerPoints because I'm able to show them up close, everybody at the same time, instead of walking the quilts around and then you have conversations as the quilts move through, through the audience. So yeah, it helped. It made me, it didn't help me, it made me do it and get those photos taken and get some PowerPoints made. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love hearing how much you pivoted. That's really inspirational.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And it's like, pivot and then pivot back. And then what did I learn when I had to pivot that I could bring forward, that it's really simplified how I present at a guild now. I don't have to have every quilt. Some of them can be a photo instead of having 4 suitcases go into a building. I can take 2 and I can kind of show the best of both worlds. Mm-hmm.
So starting off our rapid fire section, and we're of course always fine if you want to tell a story along with the answer, but the idea is to keep it short. Tell us your favorite color.
I talked about it earlier, orange and teal. Actually, blue and green were my favorite forever. I would have said green, and then all of a sudden it was blue, and then I got to thinking about it, and I love the orange teal combination.
Beautiful. Next question. Yardage or pre-cuts?
Yes. Actually, probably more yardage. If you would look behind my doors and see, I don't want to run out. So when I see a fabric I love, I'll get 3 or 4 yards or 6 or 8.
Mm-hmm. Yep. 3-yard minimum if you really love it by the bolt.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you have other hobbies besides quilting?
I'm just going to say quilting, sewing. Mm-hmm. I love to sew. I am a crafty person, but I don't go out and seek it. If a craft falls in my lap, then I'll do it. But I like all aspects of quilting. Mm-hmm. So handwork, machine work. So to me, that's kind of...
Yeah, there are a lot of avenues to pursue in the quilt world. So no shame if you stay within that one big umbrella.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think we know the answer to this one, but the next one is, what is your favorite notion?
Well, I think you're going to know I'm going to say brilliant bindings. Just because I've tried to make it more multi-purpose, but also I thought, yeah, okay, what else is it? And those of you in the camera, I'm holding up a Paper Mate pencil. It's the old yellow ones that winds down. It's a number 2 pencil, but I find this marks on almost every fabric. It's such a soft lead. Marking pens are right up there with, have a good one and test it. Mm-hmm. But I do like my Paper Mate pencil.
Yeah. And finally, we like to ask everyone, who is inspiring you right now?
My first inspiration in quilting was Barbara Cheney. So I definitely want to give a shout out. She's in England. And she's the one that said, Debbie, everybody else needs what you're doing and what you're showing. But because of what's happened, I haven't seen her lately. I still take classes if I can. At a lot of shows, I don't have the time. I know this is rapid fire and I'm going to have it a long answer. Susan Cleveland is always an inspiration. Anytime I see her, anytime I listen to her talk. So she's kind of my, and then I'm going to put a shout out to a friend that I lost a couple of years ago. She really helped to push me when I was getting my hexies, and we lost her in Paducah. Mm-hmm. But it's still there with, you were going to do that, now go do it. So yeah, there's several people, and I don't shy away from, everybody has a different way to do it. And if I can learn something from it, absolutely. I'm willing to listen.
That's wonderful. I really do think the best teachers are lifelong learners, obviously. So that's wonderful that you are actively pursuing learning alongside the teaching that you've been doing. That's great.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been a fabulous conversation, Debbie. Thanks so much. We want to remind people that they can visit Wendt Quilting, and we will link, of course, everything in our show notes and our podcast descriptions. But it's been such a pleasure. Thanks for spending time with us.
Thanks, Andi and Tori. It's been a pleasure to be with you all.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Debbie shared so many great lessons from her years in the quilting industry. Can you share with us one big takeaway, Tori?
Oh my goodness. Debbie had so much great stuff to give us, and to tell us and to teach us. I think one thing I found probably the most helpful for our audience, at least, and there's so much for me too, is she was so gave such practical advice. But I love the way that she had niched down and then built around that niche. So she niched down to that one ruler, and then was able to branch out and build out like an entire shop of patterns and lectures and workshops all around her brilliant bindings. I thought that was just great inspiration, and really to keep in mind how niching down doesn't mean you have to stay there. So once you get known for something, once you get it going and you understand your audience and it's really your thing, then you can really build on the edges of your audience and really expand.
Yeah, it does help to have one core product that you can build around. So that it is definitely a huge takeaway for me as well. I liked hearing how she developed her smaller pattern, and she was able to develop some easy patterns that fit in a small size, and then she was able to put that item at a little bit lower price point and have it as that prize at the cash register, that last impulse purchase that, just easy for everybody to grab and go and add to their order. So as from a business perspective, any little thing you can do to increase that total cart value is wonderful. So that's a good lesson there on the convenience of the size and the price point to keep in mind, especially if you're going to have a vending booth situation.
Yeah, and to speak to the size, I always thought that when I made especially my very first patterns, I thought they had to be big so that they could be, I guess, easily read, easily seen. But the way that she had structured it and the way she showed us the pictures in the video. So if you're listening to this and you want to see them, they will be on our YouTube. So you can go check that out in the video and you can see the size they are. Yeah, I found that really inspiring that you can make these cute little like pocket-sized patterns, and it doesn't have to be this big old piece of paper that you have to fit inside, folded in half and inside the little packet. So it was just really nice to see because I always thought you had to make them like it was in my mind, and I don't know why, but because I've seen those before, I've seen the smaller ones before, but in my mind they always had to be large, and having those as a smaller price point, I agree that's a great way to help with getting vending costs and increase the cart size.
Listeners, now it's your turn. We'd love to hear from you. Please leave us a review and comment with your favorite takeaway from our interview with Debbie Wendt of Wendt Quilting. You can find show notes and more information at our website, www.quiltingontheside.com. See you in the next episode.